Change control. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the change control practice. Now, for the exam, this is one of the ones you need to know in depth. You need to be able to recall its definition and purpose, as well as terms associated with it and how it operates. So, let's get started. The purpose of the change control practice is to maximize the number of successful IT changes by ensuring that the risks have been properly assessed, authorizing changes to proceed, and managing the change schedule. Basically, change control is what we used to call change management. It's all about making sure that before we make a change, we understand the risk, we know who's approved it, and we manage it on the schedule. So when we do this, this is all a balancing act. We want to balance the beneficial effect of changes against protecting ourselves from adverse effects of changes. Just think about it this way. Every time you change something, you're introducing a risk of failure. And so the change has to be worthwhile. We like things that are stable and working properly, but we also like new features and value. And so a lot of times we have to make changes, but that's going to affect the stability of the system. And so we want to be able to manage that risk using risk management as well as this change control. Now, the scope of change control is defined by each organization. This is something that's going to be decided by your governance, your policies, and your procedures within your particular company. It's going to include all of the IT infrastructure, the applications, the documentation, the processes, the supplier relationships, and anything else that might directly or indirectly impact a product or service that we're going to change. Now, I mentioned there were 7 terms that you had to learn definitions of during the study of our practices. Well, here's the first one. It's called a change. Now, a change is the addition, modification, or removal of anything that could have a direct or indirect effect on IT services. There's actually 3 different types of changes. These are standard, normal, and emergency changes. A standard change is something that's pre-authorized. It's something that we can implement without additional authorization. This is because it's something we do all of the time. The risks are well understood, and therefore it's going to be low risk. A good example of this would be if somebody calls up and asks to reset their password. That is something that a service desk analyst can do on their own. They don't need any kind of approval because it's already been pre-authorized. This is a simple, well-understood change, but it is still a change to the system. Our second type of change is what we call a normal change. These are changes where authorization is going to have to be gained, but that level of authorization is going to be based on the different types of change and how risky it is. So if this was a low or a medium risk thing, but we don't consider it a standard change, it's going to go through the normal process. And the person who approves it is who's called a change authority. If it's going to be something that's low or medium risk, that change authority might be your supervisor or their boss. But if you have a major change, this might be something that's really complex. It's going to need a higher level of approval, and it's going to go all the way up until we get to a very senior change authority. Again, this is going to depend on how your organization does it, how much tolerance they have to risk, and how they want to set it up. Let me give you an example of a normal change. Let's say that you wanted to upgrade your server from Windows 2012 to Windows 2019. This is a major change, so we want to make sure we properly plan for that change. We want to make sure we get the necessary coordination done ahead of time, and we want to make sure all the right approvals have been done before we ever attempt to install that new server software. That's the idea here with a normal change. We're going to schedule it and plan it, we're going to go and get a downtime for it, and we're going to do that change and make sure it all works properly. We've got time, we're not in a rush. Now, sometimes though, we are in a rush. And this is when things come up like an emergency. And so we have emergency changes. These are going to be expedited, and they're going to have an expedited assessment and authority process. It may be that there's a separate change authority for something that is an emergency. For example, I used to work as an IT director. And normally for a big change, I had to go up to my boss, who is the CIO. But if it was an emergency, I was the change authority, and I had permission to make those changes. So I might get a call at 2:30 in the morning on a Saturday, and they say that our file server just crashed. The hard drives in it are completely dead, and they need to be replaced with spares from a backup server, and while we're doing that, we need to change some of the configurations. Well, this is going to constitute a change, but we don't have time to go through all of the necessary paperwork of a normal change requirement. So instead, we're going to go through an emergency change advisory board. We're going to get people together, quickly decide on how risky it is, do our assessment, and then either approve or disapprove this because it's an emergency. We need to get this server back up. Then, when we come back in on Monday morning, we can worry about going back and doing all the normal change requirement paperwork and going through the regular processes to make sure everything has gotten updated in the system. That's the difference. An emergency is when you're really trying to get something back online quickly because something is broke and it needs to be gotten up right now. A lot of organizations will use their emergency as something as a normal way of business. You don't want to do this. And what I mean by this is just because somebody wants the change done today doesn't mean it's necessarily an emergency. It may be they just forgot to plan. So you have to think about what really is an emergency versus what is normal and should go through the normal process. If something is broken and you need to get the server back online, that's usually going to be an emergency. Now, as I said, the person or group who authorizes the change is what we call a change authority. In very fast-moving organizations, it's common to have this decentralized, and we might have many different change authorities depending on what's going on. In fact, if you're doing software development, your change authority might be the person sitting next to you. It might be that you review their code and approve it, and they approve your code. But in big organizations, a lot of times we want to do things much more formally, and we'll go through this normal change process and have a formalized change authority. Now, once something has been approved from the change authority, it goes on to the change schedule. The change schedule is used to help us plan those changes, assist in communicating that, and helping to avoid conflicts and assign proper resources to it. Let me give you a good example of this. This weekend, I want to upgrade my website, and we're going to be down for an hour while we change servers. That's something that I'm going to email out ahead of time to all of my students so they know that this Friday, if they try to log on, they're not going to be able to for that hour. That's the idea of having a change schedule in place. We already know it's going to happen. We can tell you weeks in advance, and that way everybody knows. It's well coordinated, well planned, and well communicated. And by doing that, I can make sure I have my top level guys sitting there ready to go when we make this change. So if anything goes wrong, we have the A-list people there who can fix it and make it right. So when we talk about all of this change stuff, it does affect different parts of our value chain activities. For example, we have a part in plan. Changes for our products and our service portfolios, our policies and practices all require some amount of control and planning. And so plan is going to help us with that. We also have a lot of improvement initiatives, right? And when we go through improvement initiatives, those are going to have changes to be made. For example, if I want to move from an older server to a new server, that's a change. And so we're going to use the change control as part of the improve activity as well. When we talk about engage, our customers and our users need to know what kind of changes are coming, when downtimes are, and they should be able to expect the nature of that change. Again, by communicating this, we're engaging with our customers, so we're going to use that engage activity. Then if we look in our design and transition, these changes are all designed and initiated somewhere, right? Usually in design, and then transition. Once we approve a change, it goes into transition to be made into reality and put into our real network. Now, this is where the change control activity is a major contributor into the transition phase. Then we're going to obtain and build things, right? Anytime I want to change something, it means I'm probably buying something new, whether it's software or it's hardware, or I'm building some kind of custom software in-house. All of that goes on in the obtain build. Once it's ready, it's going to be an input into this change control practice so that we can get it approved and then transitioned onto the real servers. And then finally, deliver and support. Changes can have an impact on deliver and support. They can have a huge impact there because if I put a new server on, that changes the way they have to do their processes. That changes the way they do their procedures. All of that stuff is going to be changed. We also want to make sure we're communicating the changes both to our users, but also to the personnel who have to support those users. If I don't tell the service agents that we went from server 2012 to server 2019, and they now have to support 2019 without any training, that's not going to be good. So change is going to make sure that we're thinking about those type of things as well. We want to make sure everybody knows what change is coming and we communicate that well so everyone is ready.